And welcome back to another weekly RedRecover.com Inside the Paint Show. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun Sentinel here in Fort Lauderdale. He's Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk, NBCSports.com, out in the Los Angeles area. For the next hour, we'll talk Miami Heat, NBA, take you around the league, take you inside the Heat to see what's going on. But we've almost reached the point now. We really only have like 2 or 3 weeks left of this, of setting up the Heat and sort of where they are and where they're going to fall in the play-in race. Kurt, you see the standings. You see the Heat have 12 games left. They still have 3 back-to-backs left. Can you see any escape hatch, whether it's Brooklyn, whether it's New York, for the Miami Heat to sort of capsule their way out of the number 7 seed? Or do you think you got to sort of align yourself to the reality of welcome to the play-in?
Yeah, outside of there's never say never in the, is it possible? Sure. But I think you've kind of got to mentally accept it's 3 games as of this morning. Correct, if I'm remembering it correct.
Yeah.
If it's 3 games, you need help at this point, right? It's not just
absolutely.
You need Brooklyn, and I don't think it's going to be the Knicks. You would need Brooklyn to ultimately collapse, and then you'd have to do things like, I don't know, win your games in Orlando. Like a couple of things would have to come together. And I don't. Is it just me, Ira? It hasn't happened for 70 games. Is it going to suddenly happen in the last dozen?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's 3.5 for the Knicks. You could make an argument there. The Heat played the Knicks head-to-head twice. So you win both of those. You gain the tiebreaker, maybe a puncher's chance. But we've seen the Knicks. This Knicks West Coast trip is supposed to be the road to ruin. And it started a little bit shaky for New York. And then they regained their footing. And even last night, I was looking at the early score in Portland. They were down like 24-3. They came away. Julius Randle started 1 of 7. They're finding a way, even without Jalen Brunson. No. So they're going to be better than they are. The Nets, the Heat trail by 2.5 games, but the Nets already have the tiebreaker. They're up 2-0 in the season series, aided by a Durant-Irving victory early in the season of Miami. So they have that tiebreaker. The Heat do have a game left. You could talk about that. Certainly, Eric Spoelstra is going to push them. To me, it's a world of difference for this reason. I know the Celtics are a little bit shaky, so maybe you could make an argument. Milwaukee is great. They became the first team in the NBA last night to clinch a playoff berth with their victory. So we know where Giannis and the Bucks stand. I think it's clear now they're going to be number 1 in the East.
Yeah.
I ask you this question every week, and I ask it to you sort of as an outsider, so I don't have to get that involved in it. But Heat first-round series. They go to the play-in. They win their first play-in game. They wind up at number 7. It's getting a little closer than people thought right now. Boston, bad loss against Houston. Philly still has a tough closing schedule. Miami Heat against Boston Celtics, from what you see and what you know, how would you think a 2-7 would set up in that scenario?
Yeah, I can guarantee you it's not what Boston wants to see because, look, as we have discussed, playoff Jimmy is a real thing, right?
Yes.
Like, playoff Jimmy is a problem. Bam is a matchup nightmare. And I think at the end of the day, the Celtics are too deep. I mean, you can push them. I just think that they're too deep and too talented, and they've got 2 elite wings that are hard to stop in the Jays. It's a long shot to beat them. I think the Celtics, they don't want to face you, then face the 76ers, then get the Bucks. Like, that's a brutal road through the East. But I don't know how. I just don't know that you have the depth to beat them because you haven't shown it. We haven't seen it consistently from Kyle Lowry and everybody. Max is hitting shots lately, but there's just a lot of things would have to click right to be in that series.
Yeah, I do think the history matters. The Heat beating the Celtics in the bubble, Bam's block on Tatum at the end of that game that set the tone for the series. Last season, the 7-game series, we didn't know until Jimmy Butler missed that 3. So I do think if Boston winds up with the Heat, I think you're going to see it in the Boston Globe and on the Boston Herald, the sort of, oh no, we get the Heat. I think that's the last team Boston wants to face in the first round. I think history matters. We saw it with Heat Knicks. We've seen it with these teams that play over and over every year, so that matters. Philadelphia, it's weird. Philadelphia, when they're at their best, look great. But we know Harden's playoff history. We know Embiid's injury history. We know the fact that the Joel Embiid Philadelphia 76ers have never made it to the conference finals. Remember, the Kawhi shot, corner, bounce, 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 Toronto in. The Raptors go on, win the championship. That easily could have been a Sixers championship year that would have changed everything in how it played out with Philadelphia in years to come versus how they break up that team. So I think there is a 2-7 path for hope for the Miami Heat. But of course, that means winning the first play-in game. Just to refresh people, the play-in works this way. The number 7, which is the Heat right now, plays the number 8, which is the Hawks right now. Winner of that game gets the 7th seed. They're done with the play-in, on to the playoffs, best of 7. The loser of the 7-8 game plays the winner of the 9-10, which now is Toronto-Chicago. They'll host that team to get the number 8 seed. It's still in motion and in flux. What the Heat can't do is play around too much to determine, one, who they want to play in the first round and who they would want to play in the play-in. It's going to happen organically. Toronto is sneaky moving up a little bit. They had a big win last night against Denver. Denver, oddly, is on the league's longest losing streak right now. If you're the Miami Heat, I'm talking about the top, Kurt Helin, because we've tried to be optimistic on our RedRecover.com Inside the Paint show for weeks as the Heat have teetered. So you're Eric Spoelstra. You have no choice here, although you do have a game against Toronto remaining. And you can sort of pick who you'd rather play. You can't pick. You could hope who you'd rather play. Miami Heat, one game to make the playoffs, hosting the team, 7 versus 8. Who would you rather play, Atlanta Hawks or Toronto Raptors?
See, that's a tough one because I've been higher on Toronto all season. But they've just looked better since they got Jakob Poeltl in the middle. They actually put some defense in the paint, and that's just kind of balanced out that switchable all-everything roster. They look better lately, and I would rather play them because Trae Young can be a problem on any one game, on any one given night, much like we're going to see with the NCAA tournament this week. You just need one guy hot. If Trae Young comes out on one of those nights where he's 15 of 18 and hitting 40-footers and looks like Damian Lillard, you're in trouble. And he's more likely, I think, to do that than the Raptors. But I'd be curious what you think. Like, who would the Heat rather face?
Well, I got to tell you, the one thing about the Hawks, I noticed the box score the other day, but Atlanta lost, and Trae Young had his 41. So in other words, the way the Hawks are playing defenseless right now, Trae could go off, and it doesn't matter. I would much rather play Atlanta. I think Atlanta is the kind of team that can say to themselves, look, this was a transition year. We got DeJounte Murray. We got a new coach with 6 weeks left to go in the season. Yeah. This was all geared toward getting ready for next season with Quinn Snyder. He'll bring in his people. He'll bring in his style. He'll have his first training camp. Wash our hands of the season. Blame everything on Travis Schlenk from the front office. Blame everything on Nate McMillan. Fresh start. Toronto plays, I'm sorry about the cliche right here, Jim Mora, but Toronto plays to win the game. I'm sorry, Herm Edwards. They play to win the game. And the thing about Nick Nurse, he can win one game. He can get his team with his gimmick defenses and his zone and his 5 interchangeable guys. There are so many guys on the Raptors roster who are, 1, playoff battle tested, and 2, can have a moment. Fred VanVleet can have a moment. Pascal Siakam can have a moment. OG Anunoby can have a moment. There are so many guys there. Matter of fact, I'm not sure about, and again, please, if you're listening, chime in on our chat board here, on our YouTube chat board. I almost don't remember any Heat Raptors game that didn't go to overtime. I mean, they've almost been all blood battles. So when I saw Toronto score last night, and I saw that they beat Denver, and I saw that they have the upcoming game against the Heat at the start of a back-to-back in 2 weeks, I think Toronto could be there at 7-8, and that's a bitch. That's a lot tougher. One thing I've gotten, chat board here, but mostly in my Ask Ira column also, is this. Would the Heat who have had a degree of success against Milwaukee, albeit without Giannis Antetokounmpo, be better off falling to number 8 and going to that series? And the one thing I'll say, Kurt, and you can chime in on this, you've been familiar with the play-in with the Lakers and teams in the Western Conference also. You don't play around in the play-in. You get your damn victory and you get your time. Let's face it, right now the play-in schedule is this. The 7-8 games are Tuesday. The 9-10 games are Wednesday. The last chance game is Friday. You would so much rather, by the end of Tuesday night, know who you're playing, have Wednesday, Thursday, at least Friday to plan for your first round, then get in a scenario where you're playing in the 9-10 game, and all of a sudden on Friday night and on Sunday afternoon, you're in Milwaukee. all of a sudden you could be going from a 8 o'clock game on a Friday to a 1 p.m. game on a Sunday with virtually no practice time. And I know, but you're played and you're warm and you're ready to go. The other teams have been sitting there for 7 days. That's not how playoff preparation works. Playoff preparation is everyone gets their iPad. They get the complete breakdown and scout on every player. You're trying to formulate your rotation to work for the other team. You want to get in the play-in and you want to get the hell out of the play-in. So we're talking about Heat Toronto possible first round, Heat Atlanta possible first round. In that 9-10 tier, Kurt Helin, what you've seen from right now, which I guess would be Toronto and Chicago. So let's go to Chicago and Washington as the team fighting for the last one. Do either of those teams in a one-game scenario sort of create pause for you if the Heat does get in the 9-10 game?
Not Washington, even though they've got Bradley Beal. That is just a messed up team. I mean, I kind of dig the cherry uniforms, the cherry blossom pink uniforms.
Yeah.
But they don't scare me. The Bulls are the team that actually scare me a little bit just because they should be better than this. And I feel like for one game, this is the game where they just take too many mid-rangers, but they've got Zach LaVine, but maybe those fall. Maybe this is the game where all that crap goes in, and they've actually played. That's the other thing. Bulls have played good defense this year, Ira. They're like a top 10 defensive team. I'd rather not face a top 10 defensive team with some guys who can score. That just the risk factor in one game is too big a problem.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting for me, Kurt, for this reason. If the Heat go into the 7-8 game and take care of business, fine. Got the number 7 seed, might have been projected for number 6 in the season, but we're in the playoffs. We can talk on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, maybe Saturday, about setting up the playoffs and you create a good feeling. I think if the Heat drop into the loser of 7-8 versus winner of 9-10 game, I think there's going to be sort of a, what are we doing here? We can't even win a stinking play-on game. We're playing the desperation game. This isn't the Miami Heat. This isn't the toughest, meanest, all the BS that the Heat throw out with Heat culture and all that. I think if the Heat have to play a 9-10 game or a loser of 7-8 against winner of 9-10 game, I think the season winds up being looked at as a failure no matter what happens. And then you're also facing the prospect of this. The last time that he played the Bucks in the playoffs, remember, 2021, they not only were swept out of the playoffs in the first round, they were humiliated out of the playoffs in the first round. And all of a sudden, you're bringing back all that bad juju and all the bad thought of what went wrong there, and you're really starting to wonder. So I think 7-8 really is a must-win game for the Heat since they're going to wind up in that scenario anyway. Want to create some hope because we got to do that also here every week on the RedRecover.com Inside the Paint show. So, Kurt Helin, I want you to create hope for Miami Heat fan of not being in the play-in by doing this. What has to go wrong for the New York Knicks to collapse over these final 12 games of the season?
Jalen Brunson has to stay out. They're just not the same team without that glue guy, without him organizing the offense. And Quickly has played better for them of late. You need a colder version of Julius Randle, who is an all-star and capable of kind of carrying them to some wins. But I think that's it. You need them to fall back to you pretty hard by just not being healthy. I think that's a team that's playing kind of well, frankly, when they're right now, but their margin for error is that big. They don't have the depth. They don't have Tom Thibodeau's already running playoff rotations, Ira. Like he's just not going deep in the bench. So the scenario that they fall back to you is they're just not healthy and they come back to you. And then you, like you said, you've got 2 against them. You got to win both. Like those become must wins because you've got to get the tiebreaker, right?
The second one against the Knicks is the second night of a back-to-back after Toronto. So you're talking about not only flying out of Toronto to New York, but doing the old clear customs, having to come in. You never know with immigration how that works out. Second night of a back-to-back, not the best scenario for this older Heat team with Lowry, with Oladipo, with Zeller if he's back, with what they have with, obviously Kyle Lowry. So they have that going on. I also think what's happened to the Knicks on this West Coast trip makes them a far more dangerous team for this reason. By Brunson being out, we're seeing more Emmanuel Quickly. He's good. Yeah. He's really good. He bolsters a bench that we didn't know what they necessarily had, but you look at those box scores, he is a starting quality starting level NBA guard. So I think what's happened for the Knicks is, I think Thibodeau, as much as he likes the tight rotation, you put Jalen Brunson back in there, you have Emmanuel quickly, you wind up in pretty good shape there also. I think the Knicks are actually stronger for Brunson missing some time because of what they've been able to develop. Your thoughts on Quickly?
Oh, yeah. No, actually, he's a guy they're pushing. Now it's New York, so they're always pushing.
Most improved?
But most, no, or sixth man.
Okay.
Yeah, as he's come into, as he's played, that's because that's the award nobody's run away with this year. There isn't a Tyler Hero. There isn't somebody you're like, that's the guy.
Right.
And because of that, because it's kind of wide open, there's been a push, and I think Quickly will get votes and a look. But you're right. He is really developed too, right? Because he's very Thibodeau. He's a very good defender. He doesn't just play on one end of the floor, but he wasn't really a floor general, and he kind of is now.
Yes.
He kind of is. He's really good at running the offense and running the floor, which is something, it's a big step forward in his game that wasn't there a couple of years ago.
And then you look at the Nets, and the Nets were a very sort of odd team. They were 39-30, which is a highly respectable record, but it was built off something that doesn't exist anymore. In other words, the pillars, the foundation isn't there. They're about a 500 team right now with what they have, which is good enough because of what KD and Kyrie set up for them going in ahead of time. They have looked great in some games that you didn't think they had any chance, and they've looked awful. They were pretty terrible last night in Oklahoma City. Do you see a scenario where they could, over the last 12, wind up going 3-9 or something like that?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely possible because they don't have the one guy who can take charge necessarily in any given night. Miles Bridges has been kind of stepped up into that role for them.
More of an offensive player than we ever thought.
Mikal Bridges, do not want to mix them up. Mikal Bridges has stepped forward for them and been fantastic. And stepped into that role. Dinwiddie is capable of having those nights, but they don't have KD, right? They don't have the guy.
They don't have the one guy end of game, get us 2 points, get us 3 points.
Yeah.
See, I think the Nets stay afloat for the very reason you think they don't. Because they have a wide breadth of talent from Mikal, not Miles Bridges, from Spencer Dinwiddie, from Dorian Finney-Smith, from Cameron Johnson, from Joe Harris, from Seth Curry, that they have enough guys that if it's not one main guy, there's still enough guys that will keep them competitive through games, which is why I don't think the Heat wind up there, which is exactly why I wanted to leave it at the end of this first segment for this reason. Jimmy Butler arguably has not played better as a member of the Miami Heat during the regular season than he is playing right now. I wrote about that at sunsentinel.com. I don't think that's really arguable. But if the best of Jimmy Butler is only resulting in the current results we've seen, Jimmy's stats are off the board since the All-Star break. But Kurt Helin and the Heat are 5-6 since the All-Star break. Might the Miami Heat have to think about trading Jimmy Butler? We'll leave you with that tease on redrecover.com inside the paint, back where Kurt tells you where Jimmy's going to be traded after this break. Good luck,
Orlando.
We'll be back. Sean Stanley. After this break on redrecover.com inside the paint for anyone in the control room. Oh, Sean? Anywhere? Anyone on the chat board want to chat while I'm waiting? All righty. Well, until Sean lets me know that he's back and we're going to break on redrecover.com inside the paint, I guess I'll tease on a little and we'll sort of move into this segment and take it from there. One of our shortest breaks ever. Kurt did not have a chance to go online and apologize for the Miles Bridges, Mikal Bridges difference, which I've done also. But you talk about two completely different scenarios. That's a completely different case right there. So, Sean, if you're there and you want to send us to break, just give me a heads up. Shoot me a text. Let me know everything is fine back in the studio. Kurt Helin, Jimmy Butler, and how he's playing right now. I know you're going to have a ballot soon, or it's going to go around the NBA. Ballots are going to come out. Jimmy Butler's playing at an all-NBA level right now and arguably having an all-NBA season. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. He is absolutely – I have not done a deep dive, but he's absolutely in the mix for all-star forward, right? Like he is if he's not a lock, he's very close to a lock, I think, in that position. He's just been too good this year.
And I do, and here's the other part of it also is the 15 missed games. The way the NBA is this year. Matter of fact, Kurt, we've seen this come out. Shams Charania has reported this in The Athletic. Woj has mentioned it also, a limitation for league awards on time missed. That's in the future. We don't know that right now. Would you, or do you think the electorate will hold 15 games missed against Jimmy Butler when it comes to all NBA teams?
No, I don't think that that's enough in today's NBA. And frankly, especially this year's NBA, where a bunch of quality, I mean, what do you do with LeBron James? What do you do with a guy you're familiar with out there? Like, what do you do with a bunch of these guys who have been all NBA level but have missed a much bigger chunk of time? 15 games isn't enough. You get north of 20 missed games and you get into, if you're less than 60, I feel like it starts to really question it. But for all NBA, I'm one of those guys who's way more forgiving on missed games for all NBA than I am for something like MVP or Defensive Player of the Year, where your value to the team is impacted by that. I always look at all NBA as kind of a overview, best players, as much as, I mean, this season obviously factors into it, but to me, I want a snapshot of the 15 best players in the game, and it's those players who stepped up this year. So to me, Jimmy's unquestionably been one of those guys.
And here's the deal about this whole proposal of you have to play X amount of games in order to win awards. And I'm going to give you something close to home there, Kurt, out in LA, the Los Angeles Clippers this year. The record's not where they thought it would be. The seed probably won't be where they think it'll be. They have been very protective of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George this season regardless, getting them to the playoffs. Kurt Helin, what happens if the Clippers have a great playoff run, make the conference finals, maybe make the NBA finals, because they held Kawhi out, because they held Kawhi out, because they held Paul George out? Do you all of a sudden say to yourself, well, the teams are doing the right thing. Why penalize players for sitting out games when it led to a better result?
And that was, by the way, the argument last Friday. This is where they discussed this. And it's Shams and others have reported. This is what Chris Paul and other union reps were saying. CJ McCollum,
right.
The president of the Players Union, both went forward and said, it's not the player's call a lot of the time. And it depends on the organization and it depends on the player. In the Clippers case, Kawhi makes more of these decisions himself, but that's also a very stats-driven organization, as you might expect, from ownership on down.
Yes,
they are driven by numbers. They force those guys to rest a lot. And I think that there is something to be said for pushing how far you want to push that, but it's hey, if I only play, I don't know, it's 58 games for to be qualified for like leading scorer. So let's say they use that number.
Right.
If it's 57, but the team held me out of 10.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, and that's the one that's going to get messy.
And I do want to get back to that later, but now we've actually, after the longest first segment ever on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint, I want to keep the tease going with possible Jimmy Butler reason to or not, or what they might get in a trade. We will this time get to that after the break. We take our first break here on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. And we're back on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint after our longest first segment ever and our shortest first break ever. So hopefully Curtis caught his breath right now. Again, if you want to hit us up on the chat board, feel free. Matthew's already chimed in. He tried to wake up Sean, and he also asked Ira, who's your favorite Heat player of all time? It's interesting. A lot of franchises you would stop and you would pause. If someone said your favorite Laker, you might think of Kareem. You might think of Magic. You might go down the line to some of the older Lakers, Jerry West and Elgin Baylor. I think with the Heat, it has to be Dwayne Wade. I think, it's interesting. I think if you were to sort of vote for icons, and I see Matthew chimed in and said he thought it was Zoe right now, but I think for longevity, for championship results, for record book, for Hall of Fame, no, Matt, we're not going with Glenn Rice. Stop it. I think it's relatively easy. Kurt, I want to put it to you the other way since you're LA-based out there right now. Your favorite Laker and Clipper of all time?
Look, my favorite Laker as a player, and it's kind of interesting, is Magic. He's the guy who made me fall in love with basketball. the white kid on the playground trying to throw behind the back passes that went, askew, let's say. Like, I didn't quite pull it off as well,
Sure.
but everybody wanted to run, everybody wanted to feel part of that showtime. So like, he's the guy who made me fall in love with basketball. So he is my all-time favorite Laker. Although as a writer, it's the guy that just retired. Pau Gasol is just one of the best guys you'll ever cover. He is just a tremendous human being.
And Clippers. And that's a little bit different because the history is not there.
Yeah. I have to think about that one for a second. Danny Manning. It goes back a few years.
There's not a lot to choose from when it comes to championship success. The one thing people forget is the history of the Clippers, that they were in San Diego and then in Buffalo. So you could make an argument that the greatest Clipper of all time was never a Clipper, and that's Bob McAdoo.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one.
Some people might point to Ernie DiGregorio, and the Buffalo days. They've had so much history there. That
the other guy I'm going to throw in now that I thought about perhaps looking is Blake Griffin. And it's not just that he was such a great player when he came in the league,
Lob City,
but the fact that he came in this elite player, and with this, he's a highly motivated. If anybody knows Blake puts in the work, man. He's one of those driven guys who works out hard. And he was the guy who forced the organization, in the words of a friend of mine, to put on their big boy pants.
Right.
They were such a screwed up organization. They're like, hey, maybe we should get Baron Davis out of here. Maybe we should stop just screwing around and bring in people who are serious. He forced the organization to take itself seriously because he was so serious about stuff and driven that now they ended up screwing him. Well, I guess not screwing him over. He got paid. But I guess he'd be the guy who comes to mind just because of how he changed the organization.
Yeah, no, I think because of Lob City also. I think because he was part of that with Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan. They were, even when they weren't fully winning then, they were fully fun then. So I think that matters. So we're talking about Jimmy Butler and possible trades or not. Jesse chimes in on our chat board here. I feel like LeBron's superhuman ability to have top-notch longevity has skewed organizations into a dangerous path. Jimmy is 33. There's no guarantee he ages like fine wine. This team isn't close, so let him go. Matthew chimes in. He agrees the Heat should trade Jimmy and rebuild. Folks, be careful about what you wish for. Because as bleak as it might seem right now that the Heat are a number 7 seed, that's still in the top half of the Eastern Conference. The Heat went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, within one shot of the NBA Finals. The Heat in 2020, just 3 years ago, were in the NBA Finals. Injuries to Goran Dragic and Bam Adebayo from being able to fully compete for that championship. There's always this thought of rebuild, not necessarily tanking, but go in a different direction. And I get all of that also. But when you step back, you could step way back because Kurt Helin, again, all I do here on our redrecovery.com Inside the Paint show is sort of throw you under the bus and put you on the spot. If I were to tell you, let's not look at replacement players right now because it might be young players and picks. So let's move Jimmy off the roster. If I told you the Miami Heat are a team who are building their future solely based around Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero, what's the upside for that team? Where would that team take Jimmy off this year's Heat and just go with what you have? Where would a Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero team fit in the Eastern Conference hierarchy?
Now you're down battling for that 9-10 seed. I think. I think that's as far. I don't think they fall a lot because Bam's very good and Tyler is. My first thought when you said that is, all right, so who's your other shot creator? Like, who are you going to go get that just go create for yourself and others? Because Tyler can do that a little. It's not Bam's role. He's become a much better finisher and he's got the floater now and all that. But that's not what he does. You need to go get what Jimmy brings when he's playing like he is this season, especially playoff Jimmy, is the elite level bucket getter / creator that you have to double team. Who else on this team? I mean, who on this team would you double if Jimmy's not there?
Yeah, that's a perfect point. Tyler Hero is getting a lot of doubles and a lot of traps because they're trying to test his dribble and get him in unusual situations. But I agree. If you have a team built on Bam and Tyler Hero and then get picks and young players and try to build around that, are you necessarily better than a Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam team, for example? Those two. Are Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero, that combination, necessarily better than Kristaps Porzingis and Bradley Beal? better than Zach LaVine and, for argument's sake, DeMar DeRozan. So when you go down the hierarchy in the conference right now, if you're looking at that level without a bucket getter, without a playoff level player, you're going to take a drop. You're going to be at the bottom of the lot of the play-in or in the lottery for a little while as you build back up. But there's also part two. Actually, there's several parts of this equation. Jimmy Butler at the end in Chicago, him and Dwayne Wade tag team against Fred Hoiberg. It was not pretty. He was traded. Jimmy Butler got into the Rachel Nichols practice with the Minnesota Timberwolves, playing with his Rolex on. It was his clear ticket out. He goes to Philadelphia. Jimmy Butler in Philadelphia obviously did not make a full amount of friends, considering how he mocked Tobias Harris when he knocked him out of last year's playoffs, saying they kept him instead of me, which there was a lot more different items in play there. So let me ask you this, Kurt Helin. I'm naming you an NBA general manager again. Congratulations. Your pay scale has gone way up. Say goodbye to the folks at Pro Basketball Talk and NBC Sports. You're a GM right now. If you're a GM, would you want to take that on, knowing that it could affect your very job?
Yeah, there's two concerns. It's Jimmy's fitting into our culture and system, and it's Jimmy's got 146 million over the next 3 years coming. Like he is not an inexpensive ad over 3 years. And you're going to, like we've seen this year, I think, would you agree? He's a guy you're managing now the rest of his career, right? In the 30s, like you're hoping for 60 games a year.
Yeah, and even the knee management came up and not playing back-to-backs, and he's only played one since, actually now two since the turn of the calendar. So you have that factoring in. I think that's all a factor. I do think on a team that believes it's one playoff player away, it's almost like what the Suns did with Chris Paul. Hey, Chris Paul was old when we got him, but still, he made the difference in the moment. So Terry chimes in here on our chat board at the Big O Show. You can catch us on YouTube over here. Give us your thoughts. Matthew, I see you there also. And he says, Ira, if you were GM, what direction would you go with the Heat? Kurt, the one thing I've learned, when you make a course change and you try to start over and go in a different direction, you can drop precipitously. There's no guarantee you get back up to even where you are right now. My thought is this. I would still build around Jimmy Butler. I would trade Tyler Hero if I had to and get some more win now talent. So if the Washington Wizards don't make the playoffs again, and a player who hasn't come out as strong about staying in his home team as Damian Lillard has in Bradley Beal, maybe is open to a trade. One, I think the Wizards would acquiesce to a request. He's been the good, loyal soldier, and they would do that. So again, I'll throw it to you folks here out in the chat board. I'll throw it to Kurt Helin. I know there's other parts, there's other salaries, but I'm going to propose a trade to you right now. Wizards going through another one of their seasons, number 10, maybe don't even get to number 10. Maybe it winds up being Toronto and Chicago like it is right now in the standings. If you were the Miami Heat, Kurt Helin, would you agree to trade Tyler Hero for Bradley Beal in his 30s? And if you were the Washington Wizards, would you agree to trade Bradley Beal if he asks for a trade for Tyler Hero?
Yeah, first off, if I'm the Wizards, that's exactly what I would want, which is a very good young player that I can put the ball in the hands of and see as part of the future. Because now I'm completely retooling around. Well, I'm sorry, who's left on that roster that's young and good? I guess Kuzma. You're getting guys more on that timeline,
or they're moving Kuzma and moving Porzingis and doing the deal.
Maybe
23 and younger. We have to start again because this didn't work out from the John Wall trade we made from Westbrook. We've done the veteran thing. We have to go younger. So
whatever decision they make, I think Tyler can fit into. Even if you're going to flip him again, like there's things you can do there. So I would jump at it from Washington's perspective. I think if you're the Heat, if you're going that route, if you're deciding you've got to rebuild around Jimmy, then that's the best player probably available. Like you said, I don't think Lillard's going anywhere, at least for a couple of years. So that becomes the guy who, unless something else comes up that, Karl Anthony Towns' his name, but I don't think that's necessarily the fit.
I'll give you another.
As good a fit.
I'll give you another. What about DeMar DeRozan? If the Bulls wind up again trading water. Now, again, I know there's the fear that, hey, it's two guys in their 30s, they're old, they can get injured or whatever. But look, I don't mean this in the wrong way. This is not ageism. But Pat Riley is 77. It's not because of the age. It's because we know who Pat Riley is. They haven't won a title since 2013, which for most years a 10-year wait. I mean, look at the Knicks or another team, is not the be-all, end-all. But what I like about the Heat is they've always lived in the moment. So what about Tyler Hero for DeMar DeRozan?
I would jump at that again if I were the Bulls and I'm retooling to get younger. And for the I would like Bradley Beal better if I'm Miami, though, just because I think he can shoot the three. DeRozan, you know what you're getting. If you put him and Jimmy Butler out there, they're going to try to 2-point you to death. You're going to get a lot of mid-range jumpers, but good guys who are good at it and should take them. But I would rather have the versatility of Beal and the three, and I think he works a little better off ball sometimes. So I see that fit being a little better. And neither of them are great defenders. Beal's a slightly better defender, I guess. But I personally, I'd rather have Beal. But if DeRozan's available, that's a guy who does get you 30 a night. It's just I don't want to say they're empty. I don't want to say they're empty calories with DeRozan, right. But he was the guy Toronto moved. Like he was the guy they were willing to move on instead of Kyle at the time. So
to win their championship,
I don't know. It's less of a.
No,
I'm a little lower on him.
You make an interesting point. If you have a DeMar DeRozan team and they make their first 20 shots and you're playing against another 3-point shooting team and they make their first 20 shots, you're down 60-40 at the start. So I get the 2 for 3 and I get all that possibility. Matthew chimes in, he says, trade Jimmy and uses money to sign a free agent. Doesn't work that way.
Nah.
With Bam Adebayo with his extension, with Tyler Hero with his extension, with the final year of Kyle Lowry's money, with Duncan Robinson's money, you're over the cap anyway. There's no escaping where the Heat are. They're going to be a tax team next year. They have all this money loaded up. Unless you can miraculously find a way to get rid of Kyle Lowry's money, you're in that situation there where you're over the cap. You have to do it player for player swaps. It's interesting. Right now where the Miami Heat stand, if you're saying, hey, Ira, let's stay intact. Maybe one more player makes a difference. No, Matthew, we can't dump Duncan Robinson. I like this. It's like this trade someone for please, give me a break here.
Okay. It's like they will try.
No, you will always try. My point being, if the Miami Heat stay copacetic and say we're just going to use our exception money, they have one exception next year. And see, because they're going to be the taxpayer mid-level. It's about $7 million. But because they'll be in the tax, that $7 million player can cost up to $17 million on the 1.5 times tax basis they have. So you say to yourself, can we get someone for $7 million who's a $17 million value? That's the problem because of where they are against the tax and everything. And because we went late in our first segment here on our RedRecover.com Inside the Paint show, I'll go a little longer here because Daniel brought in something that I actually did mention to someone when we were in the Heat media room before last game and they brought up a possible trade to me. He offered it this way, so I'll throw it out at you. This is someone who does work and collects a Heat paycheck. Would you trade Bam Adebayo and Duncan Robinson for Joel Embiid if the Sixers don't make the conference finals and Joel Embiid starts acting out?
I will go back to, I have two things really quick. I will just say, you know that every team, we've talked about this, every team has the list of stars they're watching, right? Like just who might break out. I know teams have Joel Embiid on that list.
Okay, there you
go. I know teams that are like, hey, it's not, if they don't start winning, his frustration, as much as he loves Philadelphia and there are things he loves about it, his frustration level, could grow. So like, I'm not going to, so that's not that wildly insane. And by the way, yes, I would do it. I would do it in a heartbeat. I think Joel Embiid is top 5 player in the league. The guy with all the playoff injuries, with everything else, I think that's a guy you are closer to building a championship around than Bam and whatever else you have to give up.
Now, Jimmy and Joel will miss plenty of time. You'll have to deal with that. You'll have to give yourself a reasonable amount of depth also. So you do have that going on. To me, there's part B in that equation. I find it. I think it will be if James Harden does. Remember, you've seen this in The Athletic and other places. Yeah. James Harden's going to leave and go to Houston. I don't believe it. But if
I'm just going to say that I'm just going to quickly say that's not all smoke. I don't know that he's leaving. It's not all smoke.
So if that's the case and Harden leaves, Philly's going to have to start all over again. They're going to have to rebuild it. So I could see how that winds up being possible also. So what I'm saying is I think there are scenarios. We spoke about it here in our RedRecover.com Inside the Paint where you do trade Jimmy and move on in the Hero Adebayo direction. But for as much as we've seen here on the chat board, I also think that he could say, Jimmy Butler's really good. He's a top 15, maybe top 10 player. You don't get these opportunities very often. We're going to build around him, take the same approach we've taken before, screw the future. The future will come when it comes and deal with it then. So I do think it is a little bit of food for thought, and I do think how the Heat do in the play-in and in the playoffs will further advance all of this. So that's our second segment here on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. I'm glad Sean gave us a little bit of a break. Maybe a longer break this time will help also. If you missed either of these first two segments, you can catch them on any of our Big O Show podcast outlets. Feel free, please download it, smash like buttons along the way. When we come back, we're going to look at the Heat's upcoming schedule. It is intriguing. We could say it's a soft schedule, but we know a little better after Orlando. So we'll set up the week ahead. We'll talk a little bit more about the playoff race and about players who have to step up as well. All of that and more after this break on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. And we're back for our final segment on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. If you missed either of the first two, and they were fantastic, you can go to any podcast outlet for the Big O Show and you can track them down there. Smash the like buttons. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun Sentinel here in Fort Lauderdale. He's Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com out there in Los Angeles. We sort of struck a chord in our last segment talking about Jimmy Butler and possible Heat trades, and we will be here all off season. So don't think just because the playoffs end, we're going to wind up trading every Heat player before free agency even starts. So feel free to chime in, give us your thoughts also. Terry chimes in here and says, Jimmy and DeMar on the same team will be no floor spacing, especially if you get rid of Hero. You're correct. That's when you got to get back to a Max Strus or Duncan Robinson type. You have to find three-point shooting either. John Palmer checks in here. He says, Hero and Beal is a lateral move. No, it's an in-the-moment move versus a future move. Bradley Beal right now is a better player than Tyler Hero. But 3 years from now, 4 years from now, maybe when Bradley Beal is out of the league, Tyler Hero, by default, almost will be the best player. So you have that. John also says, hey, trade Jimmy to the Knicks for Quickly and R.J. Barrett. Now, Jimmy to the Knicks is not out of the question. Tibbs loves him. Tibbs might find that Julius Randle is not his closer, and he'd rather have someone else. So I would not discount that, nor would I discount Jimmy wanting to get to the New York market, either being New York or Brooklyn either. All you see Jimmy is his ventures, his big face coffee. He lets you know that he's in for the marketing aspect also. He shows up on our TV every Super Bowl as it is playing in a smaller market in Miami than New York. So I think Jimmy going out would like to go out in the limelight. So I could see that possible. Daniel chimes in, says, if Joel Embiid requested a trade, what would be his preferred destinations? I don't see many options besides Miami. Jimmy and Joel are very close. No matter what terms you think Jimmy left Philly on or not, it was more because of other players. It was because of Brett Brown. It was just because Timmy had wanderlust and just wanted to move on, play for the team that his buddy Dwayne Wade told him. So, yeah, I think Jimmy and Joel would be interesting. Kurt Helin, I'm going to pause for a second on our chat board and throw that to you. Forget every other player on the roster because I don't know what it would take in a trade. I think it might even take Bam and Tyler Hero.
Probably.
If you are starting with a core of Joel Embiid and Jimmy Butler in today's Eastern Conference of Giannis and the Celtics and the improving Cavaliers and the teams at the top, like whatever Philly might be, where would you think, how well would you think a Jimmy, Joel Embiid, 30-year-old plus starting core would fare in the short term in the NBA?
I think you're short term, just those two, you are right there with Boston and Milwaukee. What those two teams have that would be harder to build out is an infrastructure that really supports their stars and the depth, right? And in especially in Milwaukee's case, but frankly, both of them now, continuity. You would have to build that really quickly. But in terms of just star power, I think Joel Embiid is a top, like I said, top 5 minimum to maybe top 3 player in the NBA. And if you can get that guy and put him with a Jimmy Butler, you're an instant contender. It's just a matter of how you fill out the roster.
Well, but the point you made is I think we might give Giannis a slight edge over Joel Embiid. We just might.
Yeah.
But you'd probably give Jimmy an edge over Drew Holiday, although Drew certainly can be very good, but Jimmy's the better player. But Milwaukee also has Brook Lopez. Milwaukee also has Chris Middleton. They have the depth there. So if you were to take this current Heat roster, just for argument's sake, James Harden goes to Houston, Philly goes, oh my God, we're terrible. They start, they reload, they want youth, they take Bam, they take Tyler Hero, they'll have Maxey, they'll have the young team, they'll go from there. If you do a deal like that with what's left on the Miami Heat to round out a roster, Kurt, I know you said you thought they might be right up there with Boston. But if you're talking about, I'm going to give you a starting lineup of Joel Embiid, Caleb Martin, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, and Gabe Vincent, or maybe our $7 million mid-level player or something, okay?
Yeah.
So you get someone like that, it's going to be a tough go to make it work from there, I would think.
This is where the magic of Pat Riley and that whole front office has to come in, because you're absolutely right. You've got to retool and bring in guys. You have the advantage, though. You're Miami, man. People, you are one of the 3 destinations people actually want to go to. And so if you've got star power down there, you can draw talent to play with you, but you would need that. And by the way, you would need whoever doesn't go out in that trade. If it's Duncan Robinson, if it's Max, it's, obviously I don't want to knock Gabe because I think he's played well this year, but like you need those guys to step up in a way they haven't this year.
Right. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting. Pep chimes in and says it sounds like an old team. I don't think Pat Riley gives a rat's ass about an old team. I think Pat Riley looks at a team and says, if this team can win right now, then you worry about the future. That's what I've always enjoyed about covering the Heat, is that they're going and living in the moment. They're not one of these teams that says next year is going to come after next year and keep going. Yes, Jesse, I know Father Time is undefeated, but I'm not trying to beat Father Time for a decade. I'm trying to beat Father Time for a year. And I think that's where you go when you go in that direction. Marco chimes in and he says, with Kurt's look, he thinks he's the guy from Pawn Stars. I'll leave that be. You can check him out. Kurt will be on the History Channel.
I've heard that before, yeah.
Okay, so Kurt will be on the History Channel later today, so we'll have that also. So basically, I'm just trying to say is there's ways for the Heat to look short-term. There's ways for the Heat to look long-term. But I think there are possibilities out there. Again, when the Miami Heat got Jimmy Butler in the 2019 offseason, they had 0 cap space, but they pulled it off. So if they want to pull something off, and if a player wants to be somewhere, I think they can. Well, the good thing about a long first segment and good Jimmy Butler talk is we're almost at the end of the show, and I like to get to the Heat schedule looking ahead before we meet again here next Wednesday on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. Heat have the Memphis Grizzlies tonight, Kurt, here at Miami-Dade Arena, formerly FTX Arena, formerly American Airlines Arena. No Ja Morant, no Brandon Clark, no Steven Adams, no, I'm trying to figure who else they don't have. I know they're out a few more players also. Yeah. And yet you look at the standings right now, you wake up and you say, where are the Memphis Grizzlies in the Western Conference standings? And almost shockingly, and considering all they've been through, Memphis is in second place in the West. Does this team have enough to hold on with what Memphis has in place right now with Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane and really a depleted core? Tonight, Heat versus Grizzlies, how do you look at a game like this?
This is one the Heat need to get because they are down. They are not as good a team. But Desmond Bane, I think people, if you want to get on my list of top underrated players in the league, Desmond Bane is pretty high up on it. He's really good. Jaren Jackson Jr. is an elite defensive player. So, like, they've got some advantages, and I think they also have the advantage. They're in the number 2 seed because who's catching them? Who is catching them in the West right now? That's it's ugly out there.
We really thought this would be Sacramento's season, but it's so fascinating when you look at those West standings. You go from the Nuggets number 1, even with their 4-game losing streak. The Grizzlies number 2, they're on a 3-game winning streak. The Kings at 40-27, Kurt, which really is absolutely remarkable from where anyone picks Sacramento to finish. Yeah. But then you're down to a 37-32 Suns team. The Warriors at 36-33. The Clippers at 36-33. Yeah. You have that morass in the middle right now. But I agree. If anything, that Orlando game had to serve as a wake-up call for the Miami Heat. Assume nothing. You have to maximize your home games. You have to seize on the moment of the Brooklyn Nets losing last night to the Oklahoma City Thunder to give you any chance of making a move there. You have Jimmy Butler. You have Bam Adebayo. You have Tyler Hero. You have Kyle Lowry coming back. It's cliche, but this sort of is must win, isn't it?
Absolutely. These are the games, if you want them to have any chance of climbing up to the 6. And by the way, importantly, like we talked about, holding on to 7, these are the games you got to win when teams are down.
Yeah, and I think Memphis is sort of overachieving in the absence of Ja, but I think eventually it sort of hits home. Wow, we're banging our head against the wall. We don't have our leading man. What's really going to happen with us? Again, I like Jaren Jackson Jr. I almost put Jaren Jackson Jr., Kurt Helin, to where Bam was a couple of years ago. He still needs to find his offensive game to become a leading man and a more complete player. I think he's almost Bam-like right now.
Oh, I agree. A huge defensive impact. He can dunk. He's I think maybe more raw athleticism than Bam. But Bam's now got the floater, and he can face you up, and he can do some other, put the ball on the floor a little in a way you would. As Heat fans tonight, you are hoping Jaren Jackson Jr. tries some of that stuff. He's not there offensively, but if he gets there in a couple of years, watch out.
Yeah, and so you have that game. Then coming up this weekend, the Heat have a back-to-back. The good news is they have 2 days off. They're off on both Thursday and Friday, and certainly with an older team, that makes a difference. Then they go into Chicago Saturday, and it's interesting. We talked early in our show about possible Heat playoff matchups in a 7-8 loser versus 9-10 winner. It might be the Chicago Bulls. They are maintaining that spot right now. The game is in Chicago. I guess based on talent or pedigree, you would think the Heat should win. Kurt, I would not be shocked if Chicago's favored in that game.
No, like I said, they are earlier. They're playing really good defense, and they should be better than they are with this offense. I don't know how they have with when you think about having Zach and Vucevic and DeRozan and all. How are they this bad? It's not what Lonzo Ball is costing you that much. I don't get it.
Yeah, it just, again, I know there's the head game of Lonzo Ball. He's going to be here, he's going to be here, he's going to be here, he's not going to be here. And I know they played with that all season, the waiting game where the wait never paid off. I know Patrick Williams didn't come around to be the player necessarily they thought he would be. So there are some depth issues there also. The Billy Donovan thing, you play hard for him early, maybe not so much. I think that's a tough spot for the Heat. And then you get to this odd game on Sunday. You're playing the Detroit Pistons in Detroit, but on the second night of a back-to-back. You might be tempted to rest players. Jimmy Butler played both ends of the back-to-back, Cleveland and Orlando, and was sublime on the second night when he had his 38 points. So he showed he could play a back-to-back. Of all the tankerias going on right now in the NBA, when you see those Detroit Pistons injury reports, which they try to literally put the entire roster on there, I would say even though the game's in Detroit, even though it's the second night of a back-to-back, that might be the ultimate humiliation if the Miami Heat lose on Sunday to Detroit in Detroit.
Agreed. I think they're the worst team in the NBA right now. I mean, the Spurs are actually got a little bit healthy and have won a couple games. Charlotte's still got some life in them. The other teams are playing. Detroit's just bad. And it's a game, again, those are the ones you can't let slip away, right? Those are the ones you got to win if you're going to hang on to that.
Who already lost to Detroit this season, the Miami Heat. Yeah. Who already lost twice this season to the Charlotte Hornets on the road, the Miami Heat. Who already lost to the San Antonio Spurs, the Miami Heat. Who had to survive with 0.8 of a second to play to beat the Houston Rockets, the Miami Heat. There is nothing that's a given. That's the story of the season right now. So I will say this. If you want to have any level of confidence going into the play-in, if you want to make every single remaining game mean something in the battle for the number 6 seed, long shot but possible, you have to win those games. You have to win Memphis right now. You have to win Chicago. You have to win Detroit. I have to be back here with Kurt Helin next week talking about the Miami Heat on a 4-game winning streak. If not, I'll be talking to Kurt Helin about trading Jimmy Butler again. But that's it for our show for this week. He's Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk, NBCSports.com. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. This has been RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. But right now, the Big O Show rolls on.
You've been listening to the Red Recover.